Hey everybody, Greg here, and this is a video for April 2020 at a time right now when coffee shops are closed down, as are restaurants, and people are looking for ways to get by working at home and being at home pretty much all the time, except for essential trips to get groceries or other critical items. So one thing that people are really going to be missing right about now is their favorite coffee shop coffee. You know, most people are not baristas. They go to a coffee shop for the atmosphere, but also for the really high quality coffee beans and grind and all of that, as well as the skill that goes into making a good cup of coffee. So that's what this video is about. Now, I'm going to cut away here to a video that I'm going to narrate and give you an idea of how I make coffee at home. This has been a process that I've developed over, I guess more than a year. We ended up getting a coffee machine a while back because we wanted to start making high quality coffee at home and save a little money, not be spending too much at the coffee shops, although you definitely want to support them whenever possible. Support your local, locally owned coffee shops. Well, let's get started. So the first thing that you will want to have is an espresso machine. Now, sometimes these machines are sold in separate parts, but as you'll see in the video here, I'm showing you a Breville coffee machine that has on the top, you can see where you put the beans in, and some parts on the top, which I'll explain in a minute. And just below all the buttons on the front, you'll see a tamping device that's magnetically held in place. You pull that out to do the tamping, and I'm going to show you the whole process here. But the key component here to notice is that the coffee machine itself, the espresso machine, has from left to right sort of the items that you're going to be working with. And then the buttons across the top are also from left to right, the order in which you're going to be interacting with those. And the point I want to make is that this is one machine that does the grinding. It does the espresso process of putting hot steam through the coffee to get the rich flavor out. And then finally on the right you can see a metal tube that's essentially the steamer used to make the milk frothy, foamy, and those are all critical elements. So you can buy these items separately, separate grinders, separate steamer, etc. But it's nice to have it all in one machine, I think. Well, let's go ahead then and get started on the process. First item that is essential will be to get some really good coffee beans. And what I'm showing you here is the label cut out of a bag of coffee beans that are available in our area. As you might see on the label, it says custom roasted for new pioneers. So there are a few coffee roasting companies in our area, which means they get the fresh beans, they roast them and put them to market. What's nice about that is you get the freshest coffee imaginable. And as you can see on the label here, the date is March 11th. At the top of the label, you'll see the date handwritten, which is when I purchased these on the 16th of March. So roasted on the 11th, purchased 5 days later, super fresh beans. And what I do is I take them out of the bag and I put them into a canning jar like the one you see here. And I think it helps to keep the beans fresh. By having them in a canning jar, you can really make sure that it's airtight sealed, right? And also, I think having that pressure helps the beans to continue to release the oil that is produced after they are fresh roasted. Now, I'm not a coffee bean roaster, master roaster or anything like that. I just know they taste good. So, but as you'll see here, as I give you a zoom in close-up view of these beans, they have a shiny coating on them. That is this oil that's coming out of the bean right after that roasting process. You've probably seen beans like this that are just dry, coffee beans that are dry, and then you grind them up and you get sort of a dry powder from the dry coffee beans. But these oily, fresh coffee beans produce, I think, a better ground coffee to work with. So 2 key components: get locally roasted, fresh, recently roasted coffee beans. That's important. And the very first thing you're going to want to do then is set the grind amount on your coffee espresso machine. And notice here I'm using a Breville. I have a separate review of this unit that I'll link to in the description or on the webpage wherever I'm posting this. But anyway, once you've set that amount on the dial, you can probably leave it there. Once you find the right amount for your machine, you don't need to keep tweaking that. Then you'll get these components on the top that I've set on the top of the machine. There's a strainer filter basket, a metal one that's reusable. I like that because you're not having to buy coffee filters. And then this holder that goes underneath the grinding output of the machine. And you'll put, I think the ideal amount for this setup that we have is 2 large, what looks like a soup spoon, 2 large tablespoons of beans. And look at that oil on those beans. It's so super fresh. Underneath where the ground coffee comes out, where this device is going to go in and catch those grinds, you can see it's held up by some plastic arms, and then the metal tong in the back pushes against a switch that turns the grinding mechanism on. So you push this in, the grinding mechanism starts, and there's the ground coffee. On our unit, I usually have to press it a couple times. The first time, I will go ahead and tamp down the coffee. I'll put it back in, push it, and the grinding starts again, and then tamp it a second time. Once that's done, the basket with the coffee, ground coffee, gets inserted into the right-hand side where it's locked into place, and the hot steam in high pressure will push through that basket with the filter. And out both sides below will come delicious coffee, really kind of like a concentrate. The reason there are 2 sides on this basket where the coffee is coming out on both sides is that if you're using traditional little espresso cups, you can put 1 cup in the middle, or you can have a cup on either side and be creating 2 small espresso cups of coffee. But as you'll see in the rest of this video, I take a different approach. So I use a small bowl to collect the concentrated espresso coffee. And then I take the basket out and just sort of tap it against a food composting container that we use. And you'll see there's a little bit of coffee left inside that basket. So I'll rinse that, and you can even, once that's rinsed, you'll want to take it apart. To get the basket out, that usually fits in there pretty tight. So you may need, I'm using a plastic spoon to kind of loosen it and pull it out, but you'll need something to help you get that basket out. Rinse it very well. And then you may even want to blow air into that metal filter, then continue washing it. Now the purpose of blowing air through the metal filter is to force any small pieces of coffee dust or ground out of that metal filter, because otherwise those will sort of cake in there if you don't really put a lot of pressure going back through there. Well, we have our condensed coffee, the espresso coffee, and now what's next is we need to get that milk hot and frothed in a cup. So the milk that I recommend that's available locally is an organic whole milk from some Amish and Mennonite family farms just south of Iowa City. Maybe you have some dairy in your area that can provide a similar product. And if you're looking for a plant-based alternative, there are a number of them out there. So you'll want to find something though that is as creamy as possible, because this steaming of the milk or steaming of whatever product you're going to use to combine with the coffee it ends up being an ideal outcome if you're using sort of whole milk and something with some creaminess to it. I think a skim milk would have a very difficult time foaming up too much, you know? Okay, so I take a fairly large coffee mug, I fill it halfway full with that milk, and then I begin the steaming process. And the steaming process, when you first get started with doing this, you'll find that you need to get a little bit of skill in terms of how you're going to let that steamer interact with the milk. So what I mean is that the tip of that steaming wand has a very small hole there. It's going to be blowing out hot steam. If it's too high above the surface of the milk, it's going to blow milk everywhere. It's going to make a mess. If you put it into the milk too far, there'll be pressure that'll just swirl the milk around. It'll heat it up, but it won't really create foam. So you want to have that tip just below the surface of the milk, and as you begin the process, there will be a small layer of bubbles or foam, but as the milk continues to move and swirl, and you have the tip that's just below the surface, at some point you'll have a layer of foam. So you don't want the tip just into the layer of foam. You want to continue to keep that tip adjusted so that it's just below the surface of the milk. And then it really starts to work well at the point at which there's a lot of foam. You have the tip here, and it's going to start creating not just bubbles, but more of a really almost like a whipped cream sort of foaminess. Not quite to that smoothness, but pretty close. Just very, very small bubbles. And you just keep doing that until you have the amount of foam that you want. So one thing I want to mention is here at the end, what you'll see is I'm pouring the coffee from the previous steps into this foamed milk. And normally it would be the other way around, right? A professional barista is going to have your coffee made, and then they're going to pour this foamy milk into the coffee, and that's what they use to make the design, right? So what I have is almost like an inverse of that. Instead of having dark coffee with a white design on top of it, it's a white cup of foamy milk with a dark design on it. I didn't do this intentionally, but I suppose a person could get more skilled at making designs this way, pouring the coffee into a foaming cup of milk. And so the final part here is that you want to, I want to point out too, is that I played around a little bit with the design. So at the very end, I made it into sort of a duck's head. Okay, maybe you can see that. You might have to squint a little bit and imagine it. But when you're all done, you want to make sure before you do anything else, you don't let too much time pass before you clean up that steaming wand, because it will have this foam, very fine foamed milk on it, and it's hot because steam was going through it. And so that's just going to kind of dry up and bake on there. You can get it off, but it's just a lot harder, so it would be better to kind of clean it while it's fresh. And what I do is I get a cloth or a paper towel, dampen it. It immediately gets warm or hot once it comes in contact with that wand, and move it a little bit up and down there, and it cleans the surface of the steaming wand. And you can just kind of put that back in place. Then do a quick, wiping down of the machine to keep the spots off. Stainless steel, of course, is susceptible to that. So that's the process, and there's quite a bit to it, as you can see. I think what's produced by this process that I've shared with you is a better cup of coffee than you normally would get. It's I like having all that extra milk. I'm doing basically a 2-shot cup of coffee. a latte. And but you can really get the nuances of the coffee flavor with that. Oh, and you know what I didn't show in here, and this would be just to personal taste, is add as much sweetener as you prefer. I've found with that size cup and the way it's mixed here that 1 tablespoon of sugar, so 3 teaspoons, is a good amount. If you can use organic raw sugar that's almost like you can see these little pieces of granules that are kind of not as small as a normal sugar granule, but quite big, about the size of a tip of a toothpick or something, or like big grains of sand. That's a really good kind of sugar that you can use in the raw sugar, organic. But you know, otherwise, honey, agave, normal sugar, whatever you want to use. And you might find also that this process with the extra milk and with the proper pressure and steaming of these beans, that it's not so bitter. So you should find that you don't need as much sugar as you used to. And you should also find that you won't need like these syrupy, artificial flavored kind of creamers to make it taste good. It will taste pretty amazing with just the coffee, the milk, and some natural sugar sweetener. That's about it. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I certainly appreciate any comments or feedback. Always appreciate the shares, the likes, the follows, subscribes, etc. And I'll look forward to sharing more with you very soon. Thanks and take care.